Hello, everybody. My name is Jack Hubert. I'm the creator of the My Life's Teenage Robot Fanbase YouTube channel. And today I'm joined by a very, very special guest. I would argue, possibly the most special guest that we're ever going to have on this YouTube channel, Alex Kirwan.
Hello, everyone. How you doing?
So, the significance of Alex here, I think, has been kind of understated when people talk about My Life's Teenage Robot because it's all like, oh, Rob Renzetti, Rob Renzetti. But if I'm not mistaken here, you're the person who designed like the entire main cast, right?
I did, but it should be
Hmm.
said, it is all Rob Renzetti. Rob Renzetti, he created the show, and he,
Yeah.
carried him up with the character concepts, and was very much involved with the design process. Rob's a great designer as well, and
Yeah.
really, really tutored me in making cartoons and designing for cartoons as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But in preparation for this interview, I went through a lot of your other works, like some things that I really should have gotten around to before I prepared for this. Um, I watched the Mighty Bee all the way through. I
Oh,
saw,
excellent! It's a
yeah.
great show.
Oh my God, so much
That
fun.
show should be better known. It really should.
Yeah, and I got some questions regarding that too. Uh, yeah, so I saw the Mighty Bee. I saw Wander Over Yonder all the way through. Once again, excellent.
Yeah, and
Uh,
another show that should be better known. But yes, okay.
Oh, people love that show, man. You don't need to worry about that. Yeah, so,
Yeah.
and I also watched one of your more recent efforts, the Looney Tunes Cartoons, and I really, really want to compliment you and the team that you worked with on that,
Thank
because
you very much.
I grew up with Looney Tunes, me and my sister, and it kind of felt like something was missing from the adaptations that have come since then, since like the 40s and 50s, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, and I feel like you guys absolutely like hit the ball out of the park. You did such a great job with that. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. That project's been a real dream come true, and you know that Pete Brown guard, who's kind of the brains behind that, brought me into that, and I think the timing was just right. Warner Brothers had tried a lot of things with the characters, and they gave us an incredible amount of freedom, and we used that freedom to not reinvent it.
Yeah.
We said, what if we didn't change? We didn't try to change what it was at heart. What if we just tried to make more Looney Tunes, which was Pete's big idea, and so that's been very very fun to try to take that very much back to the '40s
Yeah.
and
Yeah, and I
and
feel like you especially did that with the Daffy and Porky bits. I love those so much.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
we're trying to do a lot more with those characters as well.
Hmm.
So look out for it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. So, something that I want to ask you about the Looney Tunes cartoons. What was your role as a supervising producer? Like, what does that entail? What do you do?
So it's interesting, yeah, because I've never had a title like that before. But it kind of means I do a little bit of everything. I'm kind of Pete's right hand man, and he uses me to kind of delegate a lot of the responsibilities. But I'm uh, very much involved with. I helped oversee a lot of the making of the model sheets and a lot of the artwork aspect of the show. We have a brilliant art director, Aaron Spurgeon, and we have some really incredible artists who have a lot of history with these characters, and some people who are younger, but have a really inspired take with them. But I was just trying to make sure it the visuals got to the screen, and they looked, they looked as close to the sort of 4D stuff as possible, and making sure we had the right people and positions of that stuff. But I'm also in the writing room, overlooking the boards. I'd go to records with the voices, help spot music, which I really enjoy because I love um, trying to remember the names of old songs. It's like, oh, we could make sort of a musical pun, here, and we could comment on the action by putting, you must have been a beautiful baby or something like that on the,
Yeah.
as long as we get the rights to it. So I'm just involved with a lot of the different aspects of the show. And Pete said when he hired me, he wanted me to be a tastemaker. He just knew I was a huge old cartoon fan, and he wanted that authenticity. And he said that's what he wanted me to do, is help bring the authenticity to the cartoons. And it's been so much fun to do that, because I feel like it's one of the first jobs I've had where I've hired specifically to be a fan, and it's
Mm.
my familiarity and expertise and just being a cartoon nerd that helps me do a good job, because you'll get to a joke or a drawing or a background, and I'll be like, oh, this reminds me of this one scene from a Bob Clampett cartoon from 1938 or whatever, and
Yeah.
then we can pull it up and reference it, and like, yeah, we can use that as inspiration.
Yeah, well, if
So
that's your if that's your role in that position, then you really did a great job. But
thank you
I was
very much.
amazed. I was amazed by
Again,
that.
an incredible crew all around. I feel so lucky at the caliber of artists, and some incredible legends on our crew. People like Dan Haskett, and people like that, who are some of the greatest artists to ever work in the industry. So it's been so much fun to work on that project.
Yeah, I watched the Comic-Con panels where you guys were talking about it, and you guys all seem to be like absolutely in love with what you do, and
Yeah,
that's really inspiring.
super fun.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, a common theme that I've seen in your work, and this is just about everything that you've ever done, is you seem to keep a foot in the past. You really seem to love retro art. Could you tell me where that fascination came from?
Yeah, that's interesting. My parents are artists and uh, pop culture fans, and cartoon fans as well. Especially my father is a film collector and a big fan of classic animation and cartoons. So I've used the line before. Yeah, I'm a cartoon fan raised by cartoon fans. So I grew up surrounded by sort of vintage pop culture, and that's where a lot of my nostalgia comes from. I think a lot of cartoon fans, well, I think a lot of cartoon fandom is based in nostalgia. What you were watching when you grew up, or when you were growing up. And I think for a lot of people, that is the Saturday morning cartoons, or what was on cable. And I have that too. I love the things that were on TV. But then all these cartoons from the 30s and 40s and 50s were also very present in my life. Watching them projected on 16 millimeter, or old things that were being re-released on videotape. And so I have a lot of nostalgia for things that predate me by decades.
Yeah.
My family loves old movies, and Laurel and Hardy, and old horror movies. I'm a huge fan of Universal monster movies, and so I think that stuff, and those sensibilities have infiltrated everything I've done. And I keep stumbling across other people who are similar to that, and certainly Rob is too. Rob has a lot of nostalgia. I mean,
Yeah.
that's one of the things Rob and I would bond with over a lot. He loves old monster movies a lot too. He loves old vampire movies, and Universal monster movies, and um, so we could spend a lot of time sort of talking about these sort of common points of reference. And he loves vintage animation as well. But it
Yeah.
it is true. It's like everything I work on, I want there to be a little bit of that flavor of what I think are the classics. The sensibilities, the highest standards that the medium has ever had, were kind of in the 1930s and 1940s. To me, there is a with animation, at least, there was a pinnacle and apex in that period of time that has never been it's never been reached again. There's been lots of really wonderful and interesting things that are very different that have been done since, but for me, that's just the best of the best is kind of like 1930s and 1940s animation.
Yeah, yeah, and that influence is definitely felt in Teenage Robot and Mighty B, especially.
Oh,
In the
yeah,
title cards of Mighty B and Teenage Robot, you can totally feel it. Even episodes like the Raggedy Android ones, like that's totally inspired by like old horror movies, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and we have a lot of little references and to old horror movies and things like that throughout. So many of the projects I've worked on, I feel like that's part of why people hire me. Is like, how do we get how do we help it feel like a cartoon, and not all animation is a cartoon or should be a cartoon. Again, like I say, there's so many super cool things that have been made, but there are certain projects that are just like you want that cartoon DNA. It's not just animation, it's a cartoon. What are the things that help this feel like a cartoon, make this feel like a gag driven sort of project? And so much of that stuff comes from tradition. What does the title card for a cartoon feel like? And what is the staging and pacing of a cartoon?
you were just talking about animation kind of changing over the decades. Like, what do you think is a major thing that's been lost? Like, just one or two things.
I think I think the most major thing that has been lost is the loss of control over the projects and having to make projects a lot faster. So the way the animation industry works now is a lot of the parts of the job are outsourced to other studios and other parts of the world. And so your team is sort of spread all over the place, and you don't have the amount of control that you did once upon a time when the entire cartoon was made under one roof. So we'll make pre-production. We'll write the story, we'll storyboard it, we'll design everything, we'll paint sample backgrounds, and then we'll send it to another studio that could be in Canada or it could be in Korea or the Philippines, and they complete it. I talk about it as being like we're almost making the IKEA furniture kit for the cartoon, and how well the cartoon turns out could totally rest on how well you're writing those instructions. And that's sort of like that's not giving the animation studios enough credit because they do an incredible job, and the animation is incredibly
Yeah.
labor intensive. And now there are ways that communication is better. We communicate with those studios the same way I'm talking to you now, over a Zoom or something like that, and
Mhm.
we can shoot questions back and forth a lot faster than when we were making these pre-production kits and putting them in a cardboard box and mailing them physically to the other side of the world. But you just don't have that amount of control when it's the whole team is under the same roof and you're able to scrutinize every aspect of it. And then it's just the volume that has to be made now just means that you have to make compromises. So I believe in classic Warner Brothers cartoons, each director would make, I think, maybe 5 cartoons in a year, maybe a half a dozen 7-minute cartoons in a year, and make sure that they were really high quality. Now, in a year, you have to tell, easily you can have to tell like 23 stories in a year or more. The Looney Tunes project, we're making over 200 Looney Tunes, and we're doing it over the course of now it's been about maybe 5 years.
Yeah.
But it's just you have to kind of pump this out to get the volumes that the networks require.
Yeah.
And so you can't labor over every detail, and you can't labor over the performance of the characters. And you can't just sort of embellish. You can't. It's not about making every scene the absolute best it can be. I mean, that's what we try to do, but there's a certain point where you have to move on. You have to move
Yeah.
on to another scene, or you have to move on to another short. And so that I think is sort of unfortunate. I think so. That's how cartoons are made. I think, like, as a general philosophy about animation, I think what's been lost is maybe, I think the visual element has been lost to some degree. To me, what is the most exciting thing about animation and cartoons is that it's visual storytelling. And I think the way cartoons are made a lot of the time, there's a lot more emphasis on dialogue. And when people talk about, a funny script for something, it's about, clever dialogue. I think what's great about the classic area of animation and cartoons is it was all about building funny situations. So it wasn't about like sort of jamming one liners in every opportunity you could. It was about constructing a situation that was going to like pay off dividends, the longer you stay in it. And the more visual it is, the better. And I think people who are writers and script writers, they can still write visually. There's a way to write comedy in a way that's very visual, even if you're not a drawing person. But I've always felt that was one of the things I could provide to animated shows, and it comes from my training from people like Rob Renzetti. Is when I see a storyboard, I'm trying to think, what's a way that this could be more visual? If I'm in a writing room, I'm trying to think about what's the most visual way to tell this story or to get this story beat across so that you feel it. You don't hear the story, you feel the story. Because a lot of modern animation is kind of what we call like radio plays. It's banter fests.
Yeah.
And old cartoons, many of my favorite classic cartoons have almost no dialogue whatsoever. Like I love a pantomime story, and I'm always blown away when someone can do that well. And when I saw Wall-E for the first time, I was just like, "This is amazing! This is amazing that people are still allowed to do this." Tell a story without dialogue.
There's no
It's such
dialogue in the entire beginning of that movie, right?
Yeah. I think the first third of the movie, there's like not a
Yeah.
single spoken word, and you not only understand what's happening, but you feel it deeper, and you have to invest yourself deeper. I think for people, for a person who's never seen a silent movie, let's say if you're a person who's never seen a silent movie, you have to experience that, because at first you're kind of impatient because you're used to more kind of auditory input, and then there's a second beat where you the spell starts to come over you, and you realize that you're so much more deeply invested in it because you realize you have to be paying attention and paying attention with your eyes and into these visual cues that are happening all over the screen. And ultimately it can be a much more intimate and rewarding experience, experiencing a story that doesn't have words.
Yeah, yeah, no, I know what you're saying. I've been through the Chaplins. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, I love those Chaplin movies so
yeah.
much.
All right, so could you
No.
explain to me how Fred Seibert discovered you?
uh yeah, it's funny. I just saw Fred Seibert the other day because he just moved back to LA. So yeah, Fred Seibert had a really big influence on my life. He knew about me because this other person, Larry Huber, knew about me, and Larry Huber knew about me because Larry Huber was working at Hanna-Barbera. This is all convoluted. So Fred Seibert used to run Hanna-Barbera Studios. He sort of took it over in its sort of final years, and he started a lot of the shorts programs and things like that led to cartoons like Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls. After he was at the studio, Larry Huber was one of the directors who helped him with those shorts programs. They had a storyboard contest that was in Animation Magazine. And I was a teenager living in Duluth, Minnesota, and I entered this storyboard contest with a lot of encouragement from my father. I was technically too young to enter this storyboard contest, but I entered it anyway. I think I was probably only 17 years old. I entered the storyboard contest with the character that's pictured on the right,
Mm.
Attaboy, who became Attaboy. The storyboard of that, and I placed in the contest. And that was this excuse to come out to LA and sort of check out a bunch of the animation studios, because I was going to school at an arts high school. I was very interested in working in animation. It was through touring Hanna-Barbera and meeting Larry, who is also from Minnesota, coincidentally, and he was just a really big fan of my board and my stuff. And so he knew that I had just moved to LA when I graduated from high school and brought my name up to Fred. And so I had this meeting with Fred, and I had these weird ideas that I sort of pitched him. And I don't know, I think Fred was just sort of looking for young talent, people who had a lot of enthusiasm and for animation and energy. And so he brought me in to the Nickelodeon Shorts program, which he was running at the time, Oh Yeah Cartoons. And he had, I pitched and did several shorts for Oh Yeah Cartoons. And those are basically my student films. So they're incredibly crude. I had no idea what I was doing, but it was through doing them and through experiencing what all the other incredible artists around me were doing that I started to sort of learn my craft and learn how to tell a story and how to design a cartoon, which I had no idea how to do. You know, I started out like, I should be putting as many colors on screen as possible, you know, and then I realized pretty fast, like, no, that's not what you want to do at all. You want to strip things away so that you're always looking at the right spot and the right character and that sort of thing. So those were really my student films, which embarrassingly were aired on cable television and still exist. The internet, which I wish they didn't. But
oh, I've seen them.
it was through that project and Fred's support and encouragement that I kind of was able to get a foothold in the industry, and that's kind of why I'm still here now.
Yeah, so you were working with Mr. Renzetti before Teenage Robot on these Oh Yeah Cartoon shorts, right? Could you
Yes.
just explain what it was like working with a early Renzetti? Did you guys have any clashes or?
No, not at all. Rob is someone who, when he came to Oh Yeah Cartoons, he had a reputation, just a reputation for being very talented. He was coming off of Dexter's Lab, where he had directed some of the very funniest episodes. And so I was a little intimidated at first, but he was someone I liked and kind of got along with, and we had similar interests. And even though, you know, he was about 10 years older than me, and I was still a teenager at the time, so we were kind of in different places in our lives. But then we sort of bonded a little bit. I couldn't drive at the time, and Rob was really sweet. As far as he was one of the people who was nice about being willing to pick me up and bring me to work sometimes, and I think that got us a little closer too. We were able to talk about pop culture things that we liked while we were driving to work. And then yeah, the opportunity came up. I was kind of between shorts, or I was trying to pitch something that wasn't going or something, and they weren't quite sure what to do with me. And they shopped me out to a couple other of the creators there who would have a big influence on my life. And that was Dave Lawson, who I worked with a bunch after that. He's doing the Cuphead show now.
Oh.
And Rob Renzetti. And they were like, can you use this kid? We're not sure what this kid is good at, but he likes to draw. And so both Rob and Dave started utilizing me on their storyboards, cleaning up drawings, doing special pose models of the characters. And they found that I could draw flat and designy, which people weren't sure that I knew how to do because my own shorts weren't in that style. But I was sort of very curious about that sort of flat and designy art style, that sort of UPA influence that those guys had, and I really wanted to learn how to do that. And they liked how I drew those characters, and so I was put on Rob Renzetti's Mina and the Count shorts, and I cleaned up. He would do really rough, loose thumbnails of the boards that were beautiful. I mean, they communicated so clearly. And then I would turn them into finished storyboard drawings, put the characters on model, but also try to make them really expressive and put a really tight line on them. And Rob really liked working with me that way, and I liked working with him. And so I think of the 5 Mina shorts, I worked on 4 of them. And we just came to really like working with each other. And then he started letting me do character designs here and there, and that was my way of sort of learning how to do a character design. So both posing the characters, but also, we've got a gag with a group of incidental characters who are reacting to, a monster frog. And so I had to sort of learn Rob's style and how to, so it's very simple and very graphic. It communicates really clearly, and there's always a nice balance to the shapes. And I had to sort of learn to sort of simplify my work down to that degree and kind of get it to communicate as clearly as his stuff did. And that was really helpful to me.
Your Oh Yeah cartoon shorts. I believe that the three that you did were That a Boy, 25 Cent Trouble, and Magic Trixie, right?
Yes, that is
Yeah,
correct.
okay. All right, perfect. I just wanted to be sure. If you had the opportunity to develop those into full cartoons, is that something that you'd be interested in doing, like any of the three of those?
Are you saying currently in present day,
Present day, yeah,
or
sure.
are you saying back when I was making them?
Uh, Here, I'll ask both. I'm curious.
I mean, I think back when I was making them, very very much. I mean, that was the idea of doing those shorts, was to do things that could be turned into a series. Whether or not those all sort of lent themselves to a series is sort of a different question.
Hmm.
Uh, That a Boy was something that I returned to a couple times. That was the oldest idea. That was a comic that I was working on when I was in art high school, and about a little superhero boy who lived in a town that was all villains, basically, or there was more villains than civilians. There's more villains than civilians in the town. And so it kind of brought into question, why do you need a superhero then? He was sort of going against the grain in being a superhero. And I thought there was a lot of potential in that idea. So there was one point years later, Fred had me working on a feature version of that, but it didn't get very, very far. Now I think the sort of superhero spoof arena is so well tread. I'm less inspired to go down that line. I think there are movies like Despicable Me and a lot of things like that that have sort of have mined a lot of that territory. Which is not to say there couldn't be anything there, but I I think there's other ideas I would probably tackle before that.
Yeah. When I was reaching out to people, mentioning that I was going to be interviewing you at some point in the future, there were a few people who mentioned That a Boy as if it's like something that you're really well known for. Are you aware of like some sort of a small community of That a Boy fans or anything along those
No,
lines? No.
no, I am not.
Yeah, no,
I
I was surprised
I
too.
sell. I saw a cell come up at a heritage auction recently, and I was surprised to see that, but I don't think anybody bought it.
Oh wow.
Um, but yeah, if there is any fan base for that at all, I've not heard of it. Again, those are Well, I have great affection for that a boy, and that was sort of the idea that helped get me into the animation industry. There's a lot of embarrassment around that too, because I wasn't. I think I had a big imagination when I did that. I don't think I was a filmmaker yet, and I didn't know quite how to tell a story or deliver a joke or anything like that. So my big fear is, I'll be up for a job and someone will be researching me and they'll look at this thing I did when I was still 19 and be like, he doesn't know how to stage a shot or deliver a joke or tell a coherent story. But again, I think that was just me just trying to put my imagination on screen in some shape or form, and ultimately that's how you learn, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
cliche is you learn by failing, and and I think seeing, I was just throwing all these ideas, down on paper and up on the screen, but I saw the people around me were able to convey their ideas in a more coherent way, and then I became more obsessed with how are they doing that? They have big imaginations too, but they're able to sort of distill the ideas and pace them out in a way that their ideas are being communicated a lot more clearly than mine are. And so I started taking notes. I started taking notes furiously. So I think like Magic Trixie, which is my third chart, which is still not completely coherent, but I think on an art side, like on a design and art direction side, I'm starting to apply some of the lessons that I'm learning from the people around me. People like Rob, people like Tim Biscup, people like Carlos Ramos, and I'm simplifying the backgrounds and I'm putting attention on the characters and I'm using color palette to evoke mood. And so I feel like that one. I think you start to feel some of the progress of what I'm absorbing from around me.
Yeah, for sure. I think that Magic Trixie is actually my favorite of the three of those, but
Yeah, me too.
yeah, no. Oh, nice. Something that I was wondering about the Mighty Bee when I was watching it, the first 5 or 6 episodes or so, they didn't credit a character designer, so I was just wondering, did you also design the main cast of that show?
No, I did not. The Mighty Bee was designed by Bryan Arnett, he's a Teenage Robot alum. We
Mm,
brought Brian on Teenage Robot second season, and so he and Jill Freemark were the two main in-house character designers on Teenage Robot and the second season. Brian is still one of my best friends and someone I love working with. And we've had this sort of interesting relationship over the years where we kind of trade off, where he'll work for me for a little while and then we'll go our separate ways. And then I'll come back and I'll work for him a little while and we'll go separate ways and then come back and then he'll work for me. And then,
yeah.
we like that kind of like trade off. But Mighty B's visual sensibility certainly is influenced by Eric Weiss, who's one of the show creators. But Bryan Arnett is all over Mighty B, and that's totally his visual sensibility, where characters are so elastic and gooey and stretchy. And Bryan is someone who draws with an incredible amount of spontaneity. I think he approaches drawing sort of like jazz music. That's almost how I think of it. He just sort of wants to see what can happen on the page. And so he set the style of that show. And I came in a little later. I think I came in second season on that show. And that was me having to come up to speed and sort of match his drawing style. And so that was fun to do because he's a real nice guy to work for. And the way he gives notes is very laid back but also really helpful. It's just like you could get more energy into this drawing by stretching along this line of action. That show was so fun because I was just designing on that show. It was all about drawing. It was just about finding the best facial expression for a moment and how far can I push this, and that was always Brian's note. It was just like you could take this further, and I love having that show in my back pocket, the experience of that show, because it was just like seeing how far you could take something, how far you could push a visual idea, and how much better the scene would get because you cranked it up to 120.
Yeah, as I was going through Mighty B, actually, I came up with a pretty definitive favorite episode of the show, and I
Yeah.
swear to God, I had no idea when I watched it or like after the fact, but it was the episode where Bessie like dresses up as a cat, and it just so
Oh, yeah.
happens that's the episode. That's one of the 2 episodes that you directed, right?
I co-directed on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you and Eric,
I
right?
actually Um,
Might
yeah,
be.
that was like I think it was our Halloween special one year,
Yeah.
but I it's funny, I forgot that I did co-direct a couple episodes, which I think basically means that I thumbnail boarded sections of that episode. Carrie Yost did a lot of boarding on that
Mm.
episode too, but I did a lot of gag brainstorming on that episode. Which was a lot of fun, and that would sort of set up some things I would do later too. But I read the script, but then I would just come up with again visual jokes, and I just doodle out as many as I could, really crudely, and I'd show them to Eric, and he'd be like, "Yeah, I think we can use this one, and this one." And that was a lot of fun. There's something where she thinks she's a vampire in the end that I came up with, and
Yeah.
I forget what all my contributions were to that. But I loved working on it.
Yeah, it's been like 15 years, man. I don't blame you.
Yeah, it's a lot of this stuff. when you ask me questions about Teenage Robot, it'll be
Yeah.
interesting to see what I can remember. 'Cause
Yeah, that's coming up
it's up there now.
pretty soon. You spring up a few times in Mighty B. Like you're caricatured 3 times in that
Oh,
show, possibly more. I'm sending you the pictures of the 3 times there. Okay, there they are. Yeah. So what I'm wondering about this, was it you that put yourself in there, or was it other people working on the show that were just like, ah, yeah, let's just throw Alex in?
I drew that drawing of me there. I actually still I it's funny because I still have a printout of that uh, picture in my bathroom. So that's me and my wife Leticia Lacey, and that's us getting married. And I think we had must have gotten married that year or not long before that. And Brian, I think there was a scene where yeah, there's a couple getting married. I think maybe Happy storms in and goes
Yeah,
amok. Gosh, I
yeah.
can't remember the
That's what
context of it.
happens. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think Brian encouraged me like you can make that you and Leticia, and I think that's supposed to be Brian sitting on the pew to the right of me there. That was fun to get to put me and my wife into the episode there.
I noticed that you and Carrie Yost are credited as character designers for most of the show.
Hmm.
I was wondering between the two of you, or at least in situations like that in animation, do you ever run into complications when you're trying to design like a unified vision when you got two different character designers?
It depends on the show, but usually not. What's fun about a show like that is it's a little more. The style is so kind of loose and crazy, and they're having fun with the idea of characters, quote unquote, breaking model. And so there's kind of there's it's not that there's no wrong way to do it, but you can have more eclecticism in the designs and expressions of the characters. That's kind of coming from Bob Clampett, who is like a Warner Brothers director who really allowed his animators to work in their own style. And so the character Bugs Bunny might feel a little different in this scene than he feels in that scene, but that's part of the fun of the
Mm.
cartoon. And certainly, things like Ren and Stimpy took that a lot further.
Oh yeah.
Um, but I think, there's always a little bit of like when you're starting a new show, everybody has to get on the same page of just kind of like, okay, what do we kind of generally think people look like in this town? How broad are they? Are they going to have big, do some people have big sausage noses, or are they all, is it, tidier? Is it more graphic? Is it more volumetric? Then everybody kind of does some development, some drawings. The showrunner usually is like, I like this, and this. These all feel appropriate, and then you kind of build a vision around it. But the fun is that you're kind of building it as you go along, and people make discoveries, and you'll see. I shared an office with Terry Yost, so you're witnessing what they're doing, and when they kind of make a breakthrough, then you steal it. You're like, oh, okay, I see what's working there. I'll put that in my bag of tricks, and I can use that too.
Okay, this one might be kind of heartbreaking to you.
Mm,
I was talking to John Fountain, who has done
yeah,
a good bit of work on Teenage Robot, right?
yeah.
And he looked back and he was telling me about nights that he would get together with you and Mr. Renzetti, and you'd play board games.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Now the question that I have, I'm a killjoy. I don't like board games very much. So what's a board game that you think you can get killjoys like me into playing board games? Like what's a recommendation that you would have?
Wow, a board game recommendation for Killjoys.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, I know very few people who are as enthusiastic about board games as Rob Renzetti and his wife Tracy Royce. Uh, they love board games, are very passionate about them, and when I would get together and play with them, unfortunately, I haven't gotten a chance to do it since the pandemic, but it would be hard to keep up because some of them would be kind of elaborate, and I would usually be drinking, and of course, they'd be have been playing these games for months and weeks, and, and I'd have to come up to speed. I don't know. If you don't like board games, you don't like board games.
Yeah.
I think there are games. I'm trying to think of ones that can be picked up really easily, because I think the hardest thing with a board game is getting through the rules the first time. When a lot of rules are being thrown at you, you're just kind of like, I just want to play,
Yeah.
but I don't know how to do it. And that's where, like, YouTube tutorials and things like that have been really helpful. But I think there's a lot of games where just playing the game, you're like, oh, okay, I get what the point of this is. There's a game called Blockus that's my favorite. I play it with my kids. The concept isn't that complicated. You don't have to think too hard when you're doing it. There's no performance aspect. That could be stressful. Anything where, like, a taboo or something where you're having to do, a charade, either charades kind of thing where there's a performance thing
Yeah.
you have to do. I think it's really stressful if you don't do that all the time. Blockus, there's not a lot of rules. I love word games. I love Scrabble, and Boggle is another one that I think you can pick up pretty quick. And then if you like Scrabble but you don't want to think as hard, there's a game called Quirkle that's Scrabble without letters.
Oh.
And that's a fun one. I play that with my kids all the time. And I think if you can grasp onto Scrabble rules, you can do that one. But again, it's a little more low key, and it's not going to stress you out as much.
Okay, I'll have to look into those while I'm editing the video there. All right, so you share an Emmy with the crew of Foster's Home, right?
Yes.
Yes. So I was just wondering, like, what kind of impact that's had on your career, if any.
Well, awards are a whole thing, and
Mm.
like, everyone likes getting an award, and I love that I have that Emmy, and I'm very proud of my contributions to that, um, which are it's an Emmy for writing. I helped write that Foster's movie, and again, I did it mostly through drawing, though I was in the writing room as well, and that was a really fun. I think that led me down a path of being more involved with the story of a lot of the projects I've worked on. Certainly with Wander Over Yonder, and Looney Tunes as well. I think there's so many people who deserve awards that haven't gotten them. I think there is a certain degree of the awards that are it's either a little arbitrary or a little, there's politics and things like that. And I've seen people get really nasty. There are some really ugly situations that can happen when you're on a production. So first of all, it costs money to submit yourself for an award. So, on a TV series, they will give you a certain budget, and they're like, you can submit this many people for awards. And then, of all the people on your crew that have done all this incredible work over the last year, you have to pick, a tiny handful of them to, like, this person's worthy, and that, I think a lot of feelings get hurt over that stuff. And so I think the awards are used as a carrot to get people to work really hard. Like, oh, we got a real award winner here, and like, so let's give this our all, and people put in late hours and stuff like that. But sometimes the stuff that really deserves an award never gets any recognition
Mm.
at all. So I've seen awards bring out the worst in people, and I've seen them used to manipulate people. But then it is this thing is like, once you have one, then it's a thing you get to put next to your name. My obituary will read Alex Kirwan, an Emmy award winning animation artist. It's like it's permanently there now, and it can provide some leverage or some lubricants to getting a job, or sometimes you put that on there and it elevates your name a little bit, but on some level it is meaningless. But then of course we all want them.
Yeah.
It's a very convoluted answer, and I apologize, but
Oh
it's
no.
proudly displayed in my living room, and I feel like I deserve it. Actually, Fred Seibert gave me great advice with awards. He said, in your lifetime, you will win awards for things you didn't deserve it for, and you will be denied awards for your greatest achievements. And you just kind of have to be okay with that, you know. But I think that's something I keep in the back of my mind
Yeah,
too.
that's a good way of putting it. You mentioned earlier that your father's a big film collector, right? I
Hmm.
I was wondering if you could tell me some of the movies that he introduced you to in your childhood that have left an influence on you.
Sure. So my father, Dave Kirwan, not only is a film collector, but the entirety of my life he's been involved with the Society of the Sons of the Desert, which is an international Laurel and Hardy fan club. He's a Grand Sheik. In fact, he just went to a convention in Santa Fe a couple weeks ago. And so I grew up going to monthly Sons of the Desert meetings where we would spend several hours watching Laurel and Hardy films and also Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Marx Brothers, Abbott and Costello. Those are movies that I keep coming back to, especially now working on Looney Tunes, because I all the guys who are working on Looney Tunes, that was the comedy that they came up with and influenced everything they were doing. Like the Looney Tunes comedy very much has its roots in, you know, Laurel and Hardy and Chaplin and all that stuff. And so those have had a huge influence on me in terms of understanding comedy, understanding character, and how character informs comedy, how deeply related those two things are. That you know, you don't come up with a personality independently, which I think a lot of animated shows try to do. Like
Hmm.
they come up with sort of an arbitrary list of character attributes, and then they say, and then this is our character, and then they try to find a way to make that character funny again. A lot of times by just sort of putting one liners in their
Yeah.
mouth. Laurel and Hardy movies and Looney Tunes, the characters evolved to be efficient comedy engines. The reason that their personalities are what they are is because it creates a dynamic that is going to generate gags,
Yeah.
and every aspect of the personality is there as a crucial piece of that comedy engine. And we talk about that sometimes, that these characters are born out of evolution by doing short after short after short. They Looney Tune characters, they didn't come out of the womb fully formed. You know, you watch the first couple Bugs Bunny cartoons, they don't quite have the voice right yet, or the
Hmm.
dynamic between him and Elmer Fudd isn't quite as funny as it is a year later, because they're evolving into what they would become. And so seeing comedy like that, not as a TV series where it has to be fully formed from the first episode, but as like they're going to make a little 20-minute short here, or they're going to make a little, you know, Looney Tunes, a little 7-minute short here, another one there. And you just kind of take what you learn from each one and apply it to the next one and reinvent it. There's no canon to those things. There's no canon to Looney Tunes. You know, Porky and Daffy don't live in the same house in every episode. They
Yeah.
don't have the same job. Laurel and Hardy don't have the same job. You rebuild the universe to get better comedy with each film. And so seeing all the Looney Tunes he showed me, all the classic cartoons, I think that's been hugely helpful to me in that regard.
That's
Um,
awesome. I didn't realize
yeah,
that. I didn't
yeah,
realize that he ran some sort of a fan group for Laurel and Hardy. I'm gonna have to look into
yeah.
that.
But he's the it's a whole thing. He's kind of the president of that chapter. But there are
Yeah.
chapters all over the country and all over the world of
Hmm.
this fan group.
All right, let's see about these teenage robot questions. Okay. During the run of My Life's Teenage Robot, you were one of the youngest people on the team, possibly the youngest, and you had a pretty significant role as an art director. How were you put into that position so early in your career?
That's a good question. I think it just came from that relationship between Rob and I. Also, that I had played a role on the pilot short, which was a couple years before the series was greenlit.
I think that was 5 years.
Yeah, oh, perhaps, maybe, yeah. Yeah, I think maybe you're right. There's a big gap there, but and the story has been told by Rob and others. But basically, he was going to do 6 Mina and the Count shorts that were going to be a pilot for a series. Did 5 of them, and Nickelodeon got cold feet on the project for reasons. So he had to come up with a 6th short, and he had to come up with it fast. And he had basically designed all his other shorts himself. He had done a lot of other really great one-shot shorts for that program, Ask Edward and Cop and Donut and some other things. I think there were some other designers that he brought in on some of those things. But his replacement short, he went to me and he said, I want to do something that's kind of like Astro Boy. I kind of want it to kind of look and feel like Astro Boy. And would you be interested in designing it? And again, I had done some work on other people's stuff, but I had never designed someone else's short or project before. But it did sound like the type of thing I would love to work on. So I was like, absolutely. And so I immediately just started doing, dozens and dozens of different concepts of what these characters could look like. And we kind of came up with a look and aesthetic for that short. And we did the short and everything was great. And then we went and worked on different projects. I think I worked on Time Squad, where I was lead character designer, and I got a lot more experience as a character designer and in sort of supervising other artists. Then when the series finally got greenlit, as you mentioned, was years later, and he said, "Do you want to be my art director?" And again, I had never done anything. I didn't know what an art director did. I had never, not only had I never art directed, I had never worked on a project that had an art director that I was aware of. So I wasn't sure what that job even entailed, but I was smart enough to say yes. And I think he just asked me because, again, I had a role in the art and the visuals on the short, and he knew he couldn't do everything himself, and he needed help. And so I still don't completely understand why he gave me that trust, but that was the sort of epitome of that relationship. Was Rob gave me a profound amount of trust. He gave me some great guidance too, but he gave me so much freedom to just kind of do what I wanted to on that project. And that's a big part of why Teenage Robot is so special to me, because he gave me that ownership and he gave me that freedom. And so I just kind of fell into it and had to kind of make it up as I went along. I realized pretty quickly, like, part of the secret of being an art director is hiring really great artists, hiring people who do things better than you do, but then kind of keeping your eye on sort of what is important, what's important about the story, what's the story you're trying to tell, and what's the overall feeling that you're trying to get, and then kind of giving that sort of guidance to all the artists involved. And so we had a look on the short, and I know Rob has told this story before, but it had a little more of an anime influence, where we were both kind of interested in, I'd kind of discovered anime in my last couple of years of high school. It was just starting to kind of come out on VHS in America. And it was really interesting to me because it kind of felt like it had evolved independently of American animation and it had its own sensibilities. And so I was really fascinated, if you watched an episode of Sailor Moon, the kind of crazy faces that those characters would make were very different than the kind of crazy faces that the characters would make, like, say, in an episode of Tiny Toons or something like that. And so we were trying to incorporate a lot of that iconography into the pilot. And then in the years between the pilot and the series, anime exploded and had an influence on every single production being made in America. And it was everywhere. And by that point, we were like, maybe we don't need to do this. Teen Titans were doing all the crazy anime faces and the
Yeah.
iconography, the giant sweat droplet on the head and all that stuff. And we're like, we'd just be sort of following the main bandwagon at that point if we did that. So we want to do something a little more innovative, and that's kind of how I think I just sort of wrote on a piece of paper. I did like a quick sketch, but I wrote down like Art Deco style question mark and like showed it to Rob, and he was like, yes, let's do that. And then I was like, okay, I have to figure out what that means. Like I'm not even quite sure I know what Art Deco is. but but like it sounded good on a piece of paper. So that kind of sent us in that direction.
Oh, cool. Yeah, no, there was going to be a question after that, like, was it your idea for the Art Deco style in the show? And I guess that means that it was.
I guess it was.
Yeah.
But then I had to, and Rob, has wonderful taste with lots of things. He has a great collection of beautiful Art Deco posters in his house, and maybe that's part of why I was thinking of that.
Mm.
Um, so I knew he was already predisposed to that sort of sensibility. But what I wanted to do, I wanted to honor Rob's the sensibilities in his drawing style, which was very simple and graphic and had that UPA influence. But there were also a lot of shows that were already sort of in a very graphic sort of retro 50s style. Like UPA was a studio that did animation in the 1950s that was very innovative, very simple, and very graphic. And Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff now, we're out on the scene, and other shows were starting to kind of copy this sort of retro 50s mid-century modern look. And I knew our show was going to be flat, and it was going to be graphic, and it was going to be like Rob's drawing style, which has a lot of straight lines in it. There's a lot of planes in the characters. But I was like, how do we put a little twist on what that is? And it was on Teenage Robot that I found this philosophy that I've used on a lot of other projects, where you put a lot of things in the stew pot and something interesting is going to come out. So if you take one artist or one art style and you're like, we're going to mimic that, that's called plagiarism. And by the way, I've done that a bunch. But if you're copying one artist, the word for that is plagiarism. But if you're copying multiple things, if you're ripping off multiple things at the same time, suddenly it becomes homage, because it's like, oh, they're homaging this here, and they're homaging this there, and they're homaging this, and it's a little harder to trace. So we had like Art Deco posters, and then I really loved 1930s and 20s cartoon characters and cartooning styles and comic strips. And so I went on this bender where I was like trying to put like little hooks into the main cast that kind of would remind you of old-timey cartoon characters. I mean, not just the pie cuts and the eyes, but there's a certain way Brad's vest bunches up that kind of looks like how Popeye's shirt bunches up, and Wakeman kind of has Minnie Mouse's shoes. And I don't know why this was sort of important to me, but I was just like, let's just put those kind of like old-timey cartoon character like hooks into the character designs. And so that was another element. And then we had Astro Boy, Sama Tezuka. Tezuka.
Yeah.
Have to remember where to put the emphasis in his name. That was an element. We loved his comics, the Astro Boy comics, the Atom, I think is the Japanese name, comics. And he was really influenced by 1930s American cartoons. And it's sort of interesting because his work is kind of 1930s American cartoons put through a filter. So then I was looking at his work a lot, and I just noticed this thing where, well, a lot of the characters kind of look like animals. this character might kind of look like a parrot, and this character kind of looks like an elephant. And so I was like, maybe that's an element that we can bring into this show as well. And I don't know, we just kind of kept doing that, and I kept sort of providing inspiration, reference material to the artists, where we could kind of cobble together something that felt kind of original, even though it was using all these other elements, and that was really fun.
Yeah, they're all like early designs for Jenny. I was wondering if you were the person who created all of those.
Yeah, I think these were my design riffs. Again, I did dozens and dozens and dozens of these, and it was really fun. I've always liked doing that. When someone has a creative problem or something that needs to be designed, I love attacking something from as many different angles as possible and trying to explore as many different possibilities of what it could be. And so I remember doing just dozens of these Jennies in different proportions, different shapes. What I like less about art directing, which is or show running, which is a big part of it, is making decisions. I don't love
Mm.
being the guy saying it's gonna be this. I like providing all this raw material that someone like Rob can go and say, I like this head, I like these feet, but I like the hands on this one, and I like, these elements here. And then I can like, all right, I get it. I know what you want, and then I can kind of combine those elements to make a final, product.
Yeah.
And I remember these were fun to do. They look crude to me now, but I remember
There's
really.
there's one there that I can't see right now because of the way that I'm doing this, but there's one that's just like straight up flipping the audience off, like whoever's looking at
Oh,
it.
really? I can't
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah. I don't remember which one it is, but it's
Yeah.
I found that one pretty funny.
I remember we arrived at a design. We went through that whole process, and then we arrived at a final design, and we're starting to move forward with it. And I think it was Rob's wife Tracy saw it and was like, no, not that one. And then we went back to, I think, the one that you have here as sort of a starting point. And I think part of it, the design we had a nose. It's sort of a different shaped head. She had kind of big almond shaped eyes, and she had a nose. And she just felt a little too literal. She didn't feel quite as um, she didn't feel iconic,
Mm.
and she didn't feel like she had the same sort of possibilities that some of the simpler ones had.
Yeah, I think that you guys got it down pretty good for
Thanks.
like iconic, like the way that you can just silhouette Jen and you immediately know who it is. You guys did a really good job with that.
What you're saying is true. Like,
Mhm.
finding the right silhouette is a big part of like getting that character to feel iconic for sure.
When you went to the studio with this Art Deco style for it, was there any sort of pushback at Nickelodeon?
No, I don't remember anything like that. It might have been I just wasn't in those meetings, but I think it worked a little differently back then. My memory is that in the studio, when Nickelodeon hired someone to make a show, they trusted them to hire their team of artists and to find a look that was going to work for the show. I don't remember executives being involved in the discussions of the style or the look of the show at all. It was a little more surprising when I got to Disney a little later, like by Wander Over Yonder, to the degree to which the studio and the executives were weighing in on what what the show should look like, what the characters should look like, how the backgrounds should be painted. So on that series, I had to go through a lot more sort of hoops before they kind of signed off on the direction of the show. Once we kind of had shown the approach, then they would sort of back off more. But I think we still had to submit designs and things like that through the studio. But boy, back in the day, they were just at Nickelodeon. They were just, you guys must know what you're doing if if we hired you,
Yeah.
we trust that you know how to make a show. And so we would just go and make it. And that was wonderful because I have been on so many productions where the studio gets spooked by the sort of retro aspects of the design or look. I've been told kids can smell old, uh, that somehow if you have some retro element that, some kid with sunglasses and a skateboard is like, oh man, that's my grandma's cartoon. I ain't watching that. Which is, it's been wonderful to watch what our friend Dave Lawson, is doing with Cuphead and what that game did, before the series,
Yeah.
because you see that something like that can be wholly embraced. Like that is what's cool about it, is that it reminds you of something else, of something older. But a lot of productions I've worked on, there's been this thing where, well, we kind of have to hide that influence can be in there, but we have to hide it in some way or skew it in a way that they don't quite know that that's what they're getting. Or I made the mistake of doing designs for a pilot or something I was doing development on, and I gave this show creator all these different designs, and he pointed to a cover. He was like, and I was trying all these different looks on it, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I like something about the look and feel of these designs." And I said, "Oh, you like the kind of old timey ones?" Because I had some, I was looking at these old, like, turn of the century, I think like Cupid doll art or something like that,
Okay.
because I really wanted that kind of appeal. And it was amazing watching this guy just turn on his heels, like, "Oh no, 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 no! Well, we're not going to do that." But it was like those were his favorite designs. I just made the mistake of saying old timey, and then he was like, "Oh no, that's the last thing we're going to do." So I don't use phrases like that anymore because if they're not thinking of it that way, they don't need to. But
So,
it just gave us a lot of freedom.
yeah, and like Warner Brothers must have too, if you guys,
Yeah.
yeah, oh my God.
Again, I think they had Warner Brothers. They had done some things where they had contemporized the looks of some of the Looney Tunes characters. And again, when Pete showed them the Jim Soper drawings where they were, very retro 1940s, they were into it. They didn't question it at all. They're like, okay, if that's what you want to do. So it was another really lucky situation. They seemed very supportive that we weren't trying to reinvent it in some
Yeah.
way or modernize it. It might be just where we're at now, where there is this, like, yeah, people are open to it. They love that stuff, and if it kind of reminds them of that, that's good.
This isn't all of them, obviously. You've done a lot of documentation about how things should look in Teenage Robot, right? But
Okay.
one thing that I found pretty notable is during the transition between season 1 and season 2, there were really slight design changes in the characters. Could you just
Yeah.
explain the reasoning behind that?
Well, I would say, first of all, that that's not unique to that show. That's something I've
Yeah.
experienced in my whole career. That you design a series, design a show, and you put all this work into finding the right look for the characters and what you think they should feel like, and then you go and you start making it. And animation has got to be one of the very most collaborative um, art forms there is. I mean, there are every scene you see, there are dozens of different people's fingerprints all over every scene. But it's seeing how people use the characters, how this board artist reduces them to a shorthand in the storyboard, and how they get the poses they need the character to do, and how the animators handle the characters. What are the things they stumble over? What are the things they're struggling with? What is that really ugly expression she keeps making, and why does it feel wrong? And then the character's personality really comes out in the first season. And so every show I've ever worked on, you do the first season, and then you totally redo the model pack because you have so much new information about how those characters work, look, and behave that you can apply it to the designs. And the worst thing you can do is to just keep all that information internal and just conversational. Like I feel like you have to put it on paper, and you have to, or now digitize it, but make a document that says this is how we're thinking of the character now. And yeah, so I mean, all the famous shows. If you look at how The Simpsons look in the first season versus how they look now, if you look at how SpongeBob looks in the first season, any of that, there's a learning curve, and you rewrite the rules on the second season. That's always been really important to me. So this model sheet we're looking at here, the first season versus the second season, it was just sort of like identifying the things that were working and how people were drawing the character and amplifying them. And that esoteric idea of appeal. As a designer, you're always chasing appeal. How do you make that character as fun to look at as possible? And it's not just making the character cute. It's just like what is the cadence of the shapes? What is the rhythm of all the shapes in the character? And how do you exaggerate that and make it work even better? So the things that jump out to me, there were some things that were really stiff about the first season design, and some things that were really fussy. And her eyes were at a little bit of an angle to each other, and it was really hard to get expressions out of those eyes. I think we made her eyes a little bigger, which does make the character a little cuter. I tried to make especially your chest plate with her skirt too, like a little more directional. Like you can tell the orientation, like when the chest is facing left versus when it's facing right. Trying to get more flow into the arms and trying to get the hands a little more expressive. Her hands got a lot bigger in the second season because it's that Mickey Mouse thing, just wanting those big expressive hands that she can gesticulate with. The legs, I think they get a little more dimensional. You can feel it's avoiding twinning a lot of it too, like making sure that the left foot doesn't look exactly like the right foot, and it just gives the character a little more interest. So I think that's a lot of the things, at least we did to Jenny, to just kind of fine tune her. I think they're subtle, but to me, when I look at it, there's a big difference. There's one of the characters I really like to look at, and the other one looks really stiff to me.
Something that the artists on the channel have been very grateful for, and something that we've been collecting. You've got a lot of model sheets out there. Like Renzetti's been reposting them on Twitter recently.
Oh, that.
Yeah, and it's weirdly specific things, like things that you wouldn't think about that need to be perfect, and it really influences just like general fan art in the community. And I
Oh,
think
that's
that's
great.
kind of unique to Teenage Robot. Yeah.
Well, again, now I've sort of developed this reputation for like model sheets. I've done or overseen the model sheets on a lot of productions, and it's something I really love doing. It's something that's very important to me. But I think, again, that idea that animation is incredibly collaborative. So many people drawing the characters, and I think that the devil really is in the details. And the simpler the character is, the more kind of particular you have to be about what those shapes are to make it look and feel like the character. If there's less shapes, less lines, you got to be a little more precise about what those shapes and lines are. And my philosophy with model sheets has really shifted. I try to not make it a list of rules. I try to make it a bunch of philosophies. So I try to give artists ways to think about the characters and what they're made out of that gives them more creative possibilities rather than burdening them with rules, which I think some of these Teenage Robot model sheets are like. I remember putting a lot of work into these, and I am proud of them. But sometimes I feel like it's like a little bit of a laundry list. Like, don't do this. Don't make the ears too pointy. Don't make them too roundy. Don't make the arms too gooey, but don't make them too stiff. Like, then it just sort of becomes like a list of rules that an artist is like, oh, I can't do this. Oh, I can't do this. And now I really try to think of, like, there's some of that, but then giving them, like, please think of the character as, being as beads strung up along a wire, and you can bend the wire and the beads are going to align or whatever. Then the artist can be like, oh, I know how to take that, and I know how to be creative with that. I know how to do things with that rule, rather than it's just a thing I can't do. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I noticed something that time. You referred to the pigtails as ears. I heard that's something that happened a lot around the office when you guys were making the show.
Yeah, I think we always called them the ears, or at least I would refer to them the ears, because we would use them as ears.
Hmm.
Again, she would react with the pigtails. They would reflect her attitude. If she was surprised, they would pop up. If she was sad, they would droop down, the way you
Yeah.
would with an animal character. And so it's not really hair. I don't know. I never really thought of it as hair. She's
Oh,
a cartoon
really?
character for years. I mean, they're clearly supposed to be her hair, but I mean, I think from a drawing perspective, trying to make the character expressive, I
Hmm.
would definitely think of them as her ears,
I didn't even
which
make the
maybe is
connection that they're like rabbit ears.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's kind of tied into that thing with, like, the Tezuka drawing characters that look like animals.
Hmm.
That's kind of the way in which Jenny feels like an animal. She kind of has big rabbit ears on her head.
You also had something created for the show. You had maquettes created. Could
Oh,
you tell me the purpose of those, and do you happen to know where all of them are now? Okay, there's a picture of them just
oh
gone.
yeah. I don't know where all of them are. We only did a
Hmm.
a run of maybe 100.
100?
I have I have a couple that are broken in my closet that I've been meaning to repair. So the answer I'm supposed to give is, oh, a maquette is useful to the animator. You can draw the character from different angles if you have the maquette, and they're a really useful animation tool. Um, the truth is, I finished these a good year or two after the series was completed.
Oh,
Um, and the design of this show is so flat that I can't imagine a maquette being helpful in drawing the character at all. It's basically everyone wants a toy of the thing you work on, and this was a show that was not merchandised in any way then or now. I keep waiting for the Funko Pop
wow.
vinyl. There's like,
Yeah.
so are those? I think I have seen
Oh,
those. Are
sorry.
those licensed?
Yeah, they're like little pins.
Yeah, I've seen those, and there was one Hot Topic T-shirt. And as
Yeah.
far as I know, yes, and there's the sketchbook that
Yeah.
we did. But as far as I know, those are the only licensed pieces of merchandise.
It's kind of
So
changing now. It's that we're actually getting more and more. I think there might be some sort of 2000s renaissance, just like nostalgia coming back for it all, You designed a 3D model for a video game. I believe that you didn't think that was used in one, but it was used in a video game. Nicktoons Attack the Toy Bots Jenny
yeah,
was a playable
and it was
character in.
something where they had sent us a, a, a model they had done, and that kind of started me on the maquette. And then I had to
Hmm.
think about what this character looked like in 3 dimensions, which I never really thought about before. And then I really tried to work it out, and I spent a little too long on that diagram. And I think that's why I thought maybe they didn't use it, because I spent so long trying to get that done and get that back to them. I was like, they probably never even looked at it. I never
Hmm.
saw that game. But then I had it in my head, like, oh yeah, how do you interpret, that cheek shelf in 3 dimensions and all that? And then I had to try sculpting it in clay, and I did. I mean, I made this out of Sculpey, and then a little boutique company called Pretty in Plastic casted these and did a wax polish on them, and they made it look really nice. And we really did want to make these available in some larger way, but we didn't own the character, and so
Hmm.
there kind of wasn't a way to do it. So we basically just sold them to former crew members of the show, made them available to them. Yeah, and they're nice too, is because they're a little bit bigger than they look. I
Yeah.
think she's close to a foot tall.
Oh,
Um,
really?
so they must be out there somewhere, unless everybody broke theirs like I did mine. I think I just snapped the pigtails off, and I just have to glue them back on.
Yeah.
But
Uh,
and then there's we did a really small run of her in the hot rod colors, so those
Yeah.
are even rarer.
Yeah, I think Renzetti has one. I wasn't aware there were more than just one of those.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, at least off the top of my head, who I know have a maquette like that. You have one. Brian has one. Bryan Arnett.
Uh-huh.
I think Fred Seibert has one,
Yeah.
and I think that Rob has two.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
you're saying that you have more.
I've got a couple, but yeah, I don't know. I don't remember who all purchased
Mm.
them. They're out there, folks.
Yeah, pay attention to your thrift
Always
stores,
help.
everyone. Yeah, somebody might be clearing out their inventory there. Do you remember the day that you were told that My Life as a Teenage Robot wasn't going to get a fourth season? And was this something that you were expecting?
Interesting question. I don't remember all that really clearly. I remember there was sort of a mad scramble to finish the third season. I maybe remember something about Rob telling the crew that it wasn't going to go on and being emotional about it, as we all were. But I don't have a super clear memory. But we were, of course, very disappointed.
Mm.
And then that was sort of the beginning of disappointment, because I think it was after that at least here in the States, Nickelodeon didn't air the third season. So that was like there was a year's worth of work that we had done that we realized was going to just sit up on a shelf, and we didn't know if it
Yeah.
would ever see the light of day. There wasn't streaming or anything like that at that time. So that was frustrating, because we felt like that was some of our best work, and we had, we felt like we were firing on all cylinders. But for whatever reason, that they were just gonna sit on that. But of course, that stuff did eventually find its way out, and can be seen now. But yeah.
Yeah. Didn't the same kind of thing happen to Mighty B? Like with the second season of that? I might be mistaken.
Possibly. I think I was around for that. I think, again, you're always hopeful for another season, but it doesn't manifest. Again, children's entertainment is sort of odd, or at least my experience of it. You're kind of lucky to get two or three seasons. I've worked on very few things that have gone past two seasons. You're always hopeful that you'll get that third season. Wander and MLaaTR was the same way. We learned that show was canceled 1 week after we won the Annie for Best Series, and 2 weeks before we were premiering the second season. So we really thought, that was another show we thought that what we had learned from the first season and applied to the second season was really going to help secure our audience, our fan base, and help earn us that third season. And they made the decision not to pick it up even before that the second season premiered. I remember that better, I think, just because that was a little more recent. But children's entertainment, animation takes so long to make, and your audience is sort of constantly outgrowing you. So from my experience, it's unusual for an animated show to go beyond just a couple seasons, because sometimes the stuff takes a long time, or it takes a long time to negotiate another season, and by the time you've made it, you've kind of lost a section of the audience that was with you in the beginning. So I'm always impressed. There are, of course, anomalies. There's your SpongeBob's and things like that have run for decades, but
Yeah.
doesn't happen too often.
Yeah. Wander was still devastating because that's at least in my opinion, that's one of the best cartoons ever made, right?
Oh,
Uh,
thanks. Thank you very much.
no, it was
Yeah,
awesome.
and we definitely had plans. Craig had a whole proposal for a third season on that. I forget if Rob, again, this is going back so long ago.
Yeah.
I forget if Rob had mapped out what what the fourth season of Teenage Robot was going to be.
Mm.
But I guess we won't know.
Yeah, I guess not. I think that might be a similar case with Wander actually with Teenage Robot because I think that it got canceled right after Escape from Cluster Prime, which was like
Hmm.
the movie,
Yeah.
and that took home an Emmy as well. I believe Bryan Arnett took one home.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know.
We did it. We
Anyways,
had a nomination for that one. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, again, you were asking about awards and things like that. It's like these things never quite work the way you think that they should. It's like,
mm,
oh, we won this award, we're nominated for these awards. This is going to help secure, more longevity of the series. But the networks, have all their own criteria for why they do or don't.
yeah,
Proceed with a show. Managements change. Even when the management doesn't change, the sort of strategy for what they believe is going to pull in ratings or whatever changes, and so every now and then people come in and just sort of wipe the slate, and that still happens. That's still something that I'm having to deal with in my career. It's just it's the nature of the industry.
you designed some merchandise for Wander Over Yonder, and I was wondering if you had any ideas for Teenage Robot merch when you were working on that show.
Gosh, I remember having a lot of merchandise ideas for the Teenage Robot. I don't remember if I drew up diagrams for it like I did with this Wander merchandise. We were always told back in those days that, Teenage Robot, it's a hard sell with merchandise because toy stores, they have a boy aisle and a girl aisle. And what aisle are you going to put this stuff in? I'd like to think that's changed a little bit. I think it has because you don't have toy stores anymore.
Yeah.
That was back in the Toys R Us days,
Mm,
and they'd have. I remember they sort of tried to have like a comedy aisle where you would see, SpongeBob and Adventure Time toys and things like that. That would be sort of equal interest to both boys and girls. But I remember hearing that was a problem with like Powerpuff Girls too. The merchandise sold great to girls, but they had trouble marketing it to boys. And I had a lot of ideas for both boy and girl merchandise for Teenage Robot, but we just kind of couldn't get them interested in it. But yeah, I'm trying to remember what that was. I remember having some idea of some sort of like a that would be both like a play set that would be both the Wakeman lab, but also it would be like the equivalent of like a Barbie hair salon where you would be like doing the character's hair or makeup,
mm,
but you could like swap out parts on Jenny. You could give her different kinds of mechanical hair, give her a mechanical arm. You could give her weapons upgrades as well as sort of fashion elements and things like that. And thinking that would be really cool because as a robot, I thought she lent herself to toys fantastically.
yeah.
It could be a transformer, but just the idea of her being modular, that you could remove parts and replace them. I was like, how cool is that? But yeah, they didn't bite.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, no, it's always felt kind of obvious, like the directions that you could take it, but
Mhm.
yeah, nah, it just wasn't gonna happen. Can you remember what your favorite episode to work on was, or
Yeah,
just your favorite episode in general too?
I remember the episode I feel closest to is Victim of Fashion, and I don't remember. Maybe that's a tail end season one. I think what had happened was there was a slight gap in the schedule between seasons. We knew we were getting the pickup for the second season, but there, if I'm remembering correctly, there was a little bit of extra time, which never happened. I mean, we were always frantically trying to catch up to the schedule and always just trying to find extra time from somewhere to put into these episodes because Rob and I just wanted to continue to polish the boards, polish the the artwork, polish the models, polish the backgrounds, and it's sort of the nature of TV. It's just like, yeah, you got to move on to the next one. You got to move on to the next one. And for whatever reason, that particular episode, we had a couple extra weeks on, and Rob told me he had a storyboard that I believe Brandon Cruz did, if I'm remembering correctly. It was a really great storyboard. And Rob said, we have some extra time on this. Do you want to like clean up the boards and sort of, embellish them how you want? So I put a lot of work into sort of working out the costumes and how they worked. So the premise of the episode is Jenny is trying to compete with the Crust cousins, who we always had a lot of fun with the idea of every time you see those characters, they have different outfits on because they're kind of fashion divas, which is difficult to do from a production standpoint to begin with. That caused all kinds of problems, but it was really fun to do. But this one, Jenny is trying to beat them at their game and use her mechanical transformations to turn into fashions. And so we all had a lot of fun sort of brainstorming what those fashions could be. And I put a lot of work into figuring out the mechanics of how they would transform. I put a lot of work into color scripting that episode. I did a lot of marker comps of what I thought the sort of the color palettes for the various outfits should be and how they would lift off the backgrounds. And I remember being really satisfied with the episode, feeling like it was a really fun one, once it was done. And I think only the movie Escape from Cluster Prime was maybe the only other time where I remember we strategically built the schedule to allow extra time to kind of embellish the storyboards and the artwork on that one. And so that would probably be the second one that we put, that I remember specifically having a lot of fun putting extra time into getting everything closer to how I really wanted it to be.
Yeah, those are two of my favorite episodes too. They're both unique cases because they're longer than the other episodes as well. It's not Victim of Fashion isn't an 11-minute episode. It's a full 22. Yeah.
It may be. I can't even remember. It's been so long, but that may be the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that actually makes a lot of sense to me because there's so much like dynamic lighting and posing, and there was a lot of attention to detail put in the character designs. Like immediately, what comes to mind, there's a scene where she's in the water and she transforms into this giant like dress. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's
It's kind of like a Venus de Milo sort of dress where she comes out of a clamshell,
yeah.
and then we do sort of a full Busby Berkeley style musical number. And that was sort of interesting too, because I'm sure that musical number is very fast. There's only a couple shots of it, but I remember we were very excited about the idea of doing a Busby Berkeley musical number. And this is before YouTube. So things were a lot more trouble back then. You'd have to find DVDs or videotapes. I think we actually found VHS tapes. There was a video store in Los Angeles that specialized in rare, hard to find movies. And we got as many Busby Berkeley movies as we could. And then we would watch them. And I had this little machine that would print out screen captures of the video. So it wasn't even like now where you could just pop a DVD into a computer and convert it to a QuickTime and take screen captures of it. It was like there was this very complex process just to print out these like basically little Polaroids of all these 1930s women in geometric patterns, but it felt inspiring to us at the time, and we tried to utilize that information as best as we could.
Yeah, no, that episode's awesome, man. You guys did a great job. Oh yes, the big one, the inevitable one. If there was an official continuation to My Life as a Teenage Robot in the works from Rob Renzetti, is that something that you would be interested in working on?
I mean, it's hard to say. I've heard Rob say in interviews, he feels deeply about the characters, but he's in a different place in his life, and he's not sure how interested he'd be in revisiting the characters. There's other types of stories and things he wants to tell. I think I would be interested in being involved, not as a consultant, because I think that can even slow down progress. I mean, if someone has some amazing new take on it, in a way, I would almost want them to kind of have their way with it. But I always like the most exciting part of anything to me is the exploration process. And so I'd love to do, some design takes or whatever. Oh, we're going to update the style or the look. Like, here's some ideas, here's some viz dev concepts on what it could look like or what it could be. Because I always found that the subject matter was so fun. A female robot that can turn into anything.
Mm.
And I feel like the visual style wouldn't have to be exactly the same as what it was back then. You could apply a different sort of sensibility visually to it, and it could be something new, but you could still stay true to the characters. So maybe that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but yeah, I think it would be fun to get back in and draw the characters, work with the characters again. But as far as committing to doing an entire series again,
Yeah.
there might be other people that could bring more energy in it and sort of a fresher take to it that might be more exciting.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, so I understand that's not something that Rob's like completely interested in right now. Right now, he's working on writing some children's books, I believe.
I
Okay.
think he's writing YA horror novels. So I
Okay.
believe he's writing novels for teenagers and having a good time doing it too, I
Oh,
believe.
good. Oh, good.
So again, I think both Rob and I, we never say never. I mean, I don't want to say anything and put anything
Yeah.
out there like,
Yeah.
Rob and Alex say absolutely there's no way they'd ever want to be involved with a teenage robot, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but you get older and you realize you only have so many more years left in the industry,
Hmm.
and what sort of projects do you want to be involved in, and there's things you kind of feel like you already did, and then there's things you feel like, the things I spend more time thinking about are things that I not just things I haven't done, but things that are almost totally unrelated to anything I've done before. Totally different tones and styles of animation that I haven't gotten a chance to be a part of yet, because I kind of want to. It's not that I want to do it all, but you just, as an artist, you want to explore all sorts of different things. You kind of don't want to be pegged into just like, I'm a gag cartoon guy, or
Yeah.
I'm the, designy cartoon art director guy. I think there's so much amazing things that could be done in this medium that haven't been tapped into yet, that I'd love to be a part of in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, and you seem really happy with the Looney Tunes cartoons right now, and I'm
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. No, I'm happy for that, man.
Oh, thank you very much.
Okay, so now we're going to take a jump off a cliff here.
Okay.
We have fan questions. Questions from the
Oh, cool.
fans. First one here, from Derek Mage. Could you please explain the design philosophy behind Jenny?
Hmm. Well, I mean, the design philosophy behind Jenny is similar to the design philosophy behind the whole show, which was, flat and designy, Art Deco influence. So Art Deco, how Art Deco is a little different from other sort of flat drawing styles, say like other UPA inspired styles from the 50s and 60s, is Art Deco has a lot of geometric shapes. It has a lot of repeating patterns. It has almost a lot of design no-nos. Like when you're designing a character, kind of using the Disney philosophies, you want to avoid twinning, you want to avoid repeating shapes, you want to avoid repeating patterns, you want to avoid parallel lines. And Teenage Robot, we were trying to find appealing ways to bring those elements into the characters. Uh, so her ponytails are sort of perfectly twinning each other, and some poses her legs are totally the same, but at the same time we were trying to make her as cute and appealing as possible, and we discussed those sort of second season tweaks where maybe the first season the Art Deco influence was stiffening her up and limiting her too much. And I tried to bring just a little more traditional cartoon design into her to make her cute, appealing, and really flexible. So that you could have a lot of fun with the posing. That's another part of the philosophy of the design of a show like Teenage Robot is every pose is a new design. And I think that's part of what is exciting and fun to watch shows in that style, that it's so stylized that every pose, it kind of has to be designed from scratch, how the shapes are going to work. Like if Jenny folds her arms, like it took a lot of doing to figure out how what's a graphic shape that describes that, and how much of her hands you see. Or if she sits down, like what parts of her legs don't you see, and maybe her leg has to become a different kind of shape. And we really like stuff like that. Like, you think of classic cartoon characters, you think of Snoopy. Snoopy looks one way, but if he's dancing and he puts his nose up in the air and he's got that little smile on his face, it's a totally different design. It almost has nothing to do with the normal Snoopy design, but it's how you get from point A to point B that's sort of fun and exciting and surprising.
Okay. I guess this was kind of covered a little bit earlier when you were talking about Victim of Fashion, but what is your favorite transformation or costume that Jenny had throughout the show? That could be like a weapon or just a general transformation.
Yeah, because there were a lot of recurring ones, and I was really excited when they did I'm going to forget the name, but the
Hmm.
Nickelodeon Super Smash Brothers
Yeah, yeah.
game, because when they finally brought in Jenny this year, they used so many of the transformations from the series and did a really great job aping the design and animation from the series. So it was fun to watch that, because I was like, oh, I designed that. And I forgot that she did that one. I don't know, because I can't remember all of them.
Yeah, that's fair.
I definitely remember this gun. We got to get a lot of mileage out of the gun on this sheet, and kind of remember working out how that would transform. The satellite dish that came out of the ear, I always thought that was kind of cool looking.
Hmm.
And then the one that we got a lot of mileage was that monitor that would come out of her chest, that Wakeman, the Wakeman phone. And we always loved that sort of visual idea that, like, it's so annoying to have your mom calling you on your phone when you're trying to do your own thing, but to have this giant mom face that pops out of your chest, and maybe you don't want the mom to see what's going on or whatever, and it's this thing that she kind of has to wrestle with. I think we had a lot of fun with that idea.
Yeah.
I designed how a lot of the transformations worked early on. Later on, we got this artist, Sunil Hall, was our prop designer, but incredibly talented guy. He's a director now, but he had so much fun working. A lot of people, I think, would view this as a real chore, because a lot of times the storyboards would be like, one panel would be Jenny standing there, and then the next panel would be she'd have a crazy bazooka, or she'd be an igloo or whatever it is, and someone would have to go and figure out how that worked and how you got from A to B. And Sunil always did a brilliant job of figuring that stuff out, but keeping it in the style of the show, which is also challenging also. So it always felt really graphic, and some of the sheets he did with the transformations were just beautiful.
Speedrun asks, what motivates you to keep working on improving your art? When you were younger, what kept you from feeling like you weren't good enough for the industry?
Oh, that's interesting. When I was younger, I had a lot of false confidence. I think there's a certain confidence you have when you're a teenager that's both annoying but helpful, where you kind of think you know everything, and you value your own talents and opinions very, very high, and that oddly can kind of get you into a few doors, as long as you're not too sort of obnoxious about it. And we all get sort of humbled at some point. But it also, things were a little different then. I was a big fish in a little pond. I was growing up in Duluth, Minnesota, and in most of the schools I went to, I was kind of the only kid who was interested in drawing and animation. Eventually, I went to an art high school where there was more interest. I had more peers who were kind of maybe not as specifically interested in animation, some of them, but kind of were interested in similar things and were interested in kind of cultivating their talent in that way. And then that was fun because that becomes a little competitive in a good way. Then when I started, we talked about, oh yeah, cartoons. That was sort of like a humbling experience, but I was, again, maybe not competing, but around people who were more experienced, more polished, and that competition kind of helped me to up my game a little bit. I think that's what happens to a lot of people in like art college. If they go to Cal Arts or something like that, they see other people working on student films, and they're like, they got to up their game. So, I mean, part of it is sort of fueled by insecurity, but some of it's just a curiosity of just sort of seeing what you're capable of. And I love animation. I forget if we've talked about this, but I love animation because you kind of constantly have to reinvent yourself and work in different styles. And I feel like it keeps your skills sharp. And if I go too long where I'm not doing too much drawing, because every now and then recently a lot of my jobs have been more supervisory, whether I'm an art director or a producer on something. And I'm doing more informational sketches and less kind of polished drawing. And I think that's okay, but every now and then I just sort of crave to be drawing, draftsmanship, actually problem solving a drawing again. And so I'll either take on a little more of my job or take on a little side hustle thing or, do something for myself where I'm drawing. And then I remember how hard work drawing is. And I'm like, I should have taken on extra stuff. I should have left this to people who are younger and more polished than I am, or older and more experienced than I am.
Yeah,
And just done little post-it doodles that they can follow up.
Yeah, but that's like a testament to how much you love what you do, right? Like the fact that you do want to take on more and you want
Yes.
to keep on drawing. Oh, that's
Yes.
awesome. That's awesome. We should all aspire to love our jobs as much as that.
Yes, I think that's really true. And I really do love drawing. I just think it's the greatest thing ever to be able to communicate almost any idea from your head and not have to use any words to do it. And to be able to communicate something in such a specific way is such a fun thing to be able to do. I think for anyone.
Yeah.
I still love it.
Awesome. Okay, next question here is from SD. What's your favorite villain and side character in My Life as a Teenage Robot? If you can remember, once again. It's been like 20 years.
Yeah. I remember Kilgore. Is it Kilgore? The
Yeah.
little wind up robot, because that was a pitch I had. That was an idea that I pitched Rob, that what if there's like a little tiny a villain that's more of an annoyance than a threat. And we could have a lot of fun with stories with that character, So there's characters that are really hard to battle and really tough to beat. And then there's a character who just believes they're evil, but it's not a threat at all, but they're just so annoying they won't go away. And so I pitched this idea that there's a little wind-up toy that basically considers himself Jenny's equivalent and considers himself her arch nemesis. And I remember having fun designing that character. And then I think Dave Thomas did that storyboard. He wasn't on staff at that time, but he freelanced the board, and he was someone whose work I always liked a lot. He made that board really, really funny. So, and we brought back the character at least once or twice after that once. Initial. So yeah, okay. Yeah. We paired him with Armageddroid, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Who probably is the greatest threat, the most intimidating. That's a character, a villain that I remember really loving also, because he's sort of there's not a lot of personality there, but I just love the idea. I mean, it's basically he's a building. I mean, we made him look like the Chrysler Building.
Yeah.
And also this robot from the serial that we were obsessed with. We watched these old 1940s RKO serials on our lunch breaks, the Phantom Creeps, and we made him look like the robot from that.
I couldn't really do research to verify whether or not this was true. I tried to find out, but apparently Jamie Hewlett, the person who designed Gorillas, was also some sort of influence on your career, specifically on Data Boy. Is that still the case?
I've always been a big fan of Jamie Hewlett. I don't know if specifically on That a Boy. Trying to remember how familiar I would have been with his work back then. I guess I was to some extent, because I think at my art high school, a lot of people were circulating Tank Girl comics. Again, the Tank Girl comics that were primarily published in England, and so someone, again, would have had to have found a way to import them to the U.S. I don't know if they were reprinting them here yet. And I remember thinking those were just sort of the epitome of, edgy grunge cool back then. I remember getting a huge group of people together, my friends from my art high school, and going to the premiere of the live action movie and being just really crushingly disappointed by it. But then I think Gorillas, I'm trying to remember when Gorillas came out. I think we probably were working on Teenage Robot. Yeah, for sure. And just thinking that art style was so cool, and the interpretation of his art style that they were using in the videos at that time, where they kind of had to simplify his work down to something even a little more graphic. I think it was I'm blanking on the British animation studio that did that early stuff, but it was so great. But yeah, I had all the vinyl toys in my office and all that. I don't know. I've always been a fan. I can't say specifically how it's influenced any particular thing that I've worked on, but I've always loved the stuff he does, for sure.
Yeah, it's dramatically different from what you do, so I wasn't sure about that, but I thought that was an interesting question. Who are some other big influences on your work? I grouped all the influences together.
This is such a hard question, because
So many, right?
I mean, there are thousands. I mean, I voraciously devour other cartoon styles, and so it's hard for me to think of like really specifically like who my desert island kind of influences are. I mean, I love everything from like, I'm a huge fan of like Winsor McCay, like Little Nemo and Slumberland. Like my son's middle name is McCay, named after Winsor McCay. I think there's a Winsor McCay sequence in one of the Teenage Robot episodes. Yeah, I think there's an episode where she has a dream chip where she's like dreaming during the day, and I think Andy Soriano came in and helped design some sort of Winsor McCay looking characters for that.
Yeah, put a finger forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And then so I love 1930s cartoons. I love Fleischer cartoons, Betty Boop cartoons, Popeye cartoons, the Superman cartoons they did. Those are, I mean, I love all kind of classic, but those are really high on the list. And that's something people have said, like there's always like a little bit of that 1930s influence and a lot of the stuff I've done. And then I love world cartooning. I love Tove Janssen's Moomin. There's a lot of Moomin stuff in our house. I love Astro Boy. I don't know. There's just, I love cartooning and drawing from all parts of the world and all eras of history. I can find things to get excited about. And that's the lamest answer ever.
Next question here from Kevin Cullen. Were there any guidelines that you had to follow when developing My Life as a Teenage Robot, or were you allowed to be as imaginative as you wanted to be? You mentioned they were kind of free with the Art Deco style in the first part.
Yeah, artistically, I don't remember any constraints, as far as what we could and couldn't do with the overall visual sensibility of the show. There are always constraints if you're making cartoons for kids, a kids network. There's always jokes you can't get away with, or things that are deemed imitatable acts. That um, are it's like, oh, what they're doing there is too dangerous, or can you stage it off screen? But I always thought that was great that they didn't try to weigh in on the art style that I remember, so that we got to do it sort of the way we wanted to.
Yeah, something that I know they did block, and I'm not sure how much you know about this. There was supposed to be a third Raggedy Android episode at some point where she kidnaps Brad, and this is something that Renzetti confirmed. This isn't like some sort of
Yeah.
it isn't a fan theory or anything, but there was supposed to be a third one, and they didn't let that go through because it was too dark or something.
Yeah, that rings a bell. I mean, every now and then there was something, there was a premise that we wanted to do. Again, I wish I could remember more.
Mm.
I remember that dream episode you have the picture of that we're just talking about. We had to write that a few times. I think we had it more clearly a drug metaphor. It kind
Mm.
of is still,
It
but I
is.
mean, I think we were even more overt about it in the first versions, and they really wanted us to pull back on that. Perhaps wisely, I
Mm.
don't know. Now having kids, is like there's probably having kids and then getting kind of uncomfortable when certain things come up and entertainment you're all watching together. Like I get it. When you're younger, you're kind of trying to see. I've never been a subversive artist. I've never been someone who I think tries to push the boundaries of kind of what you can get away with or whatever. But then there are just, I don't know, there's certain ideas that are just sort of interesting, and so many things have been done on TV. You're just trying to think of things that haven't been done before, and every now and then you'll stumble into an idea, or they're just like, that is too dark. That's just
Yeah.
a little too provocative. And you're like, yeah, okay, we'll come up with something different.
Yeah,
I,
I'm
I,
glad they said that about Daydream Believers, named that episode.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, monkeys, whatever. Uh, yeah, no, I'm glad that you said that because I did have a bit of a discussion with somebody before. Like I was writing a video about that episode, and I mentioned like this is clearly some sort of drug metaphor going on here, and they're like, no, it's not. There's no way. But you just put that to rest. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, in your face,
it's
whoever that was.
yeah.
Okay.
I had to settle a bet for you.
Thank you. All right, this question is from Teal. What do you think has been causing the slow resurgence of My Life as a Teenage Robot in the mainstream? I know you noticed it a while ago on Instagram with an influx of likes on your Teenage Robot production artwork. And what I'll say to that real quick is, before I was even preparing for this, they announced that Jenny was going to be in that Nickelodeon fighting game, and
Oh,
that exploded. Like that was
yeah,
huge. Yeah,
yeah.
so what do you think could be the reason why there's this fanfare behind the show now?
Someone actually, an executive I still work with, who was an executive on the show, who kind of mentioned that, like, why am I hearing so much about Teenage Robot right now? I mean, I feel like we're coming up on or on an anniversary. Are we somewhere around like 20
Um,
years since the show came out?
20 years since you guys were working on it, and on August the 1st, 2023, it's going to be 20 years.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know, as much as sort of arbitrary anniversaries influence things. I mean, really, I think it's the life cycle of nostalgia.
Mm.
And I think when you work in the industry long enough, it's really fun to sort of see that cycle of nostalgia where you work on something, you put it out in the world, especially when we were making this stuff pre-internet, you just sort of like releasing something into silence. Like the only way would have to know whether people liked it or not was basically Nielsen ratings back then. This number they would give you of like how many eyeballs were on the TV set when the show was on this particular night. And there's a lot of reasons why that could be sort of misleading. It could be people were watching the thing before it, or whatever. There's all sorts
Yeah.
of factors for that. I feel like there was enough internet when we were doing the show that fan artwork started flowing in, and so that was really exciting because that was the first thing I ever worked on. Where like, oh, there's fan art, and that sort of acknowledges people are out there and enjoying this. The ratings on the show were never phenomenal, and I don't know if that was because we were sort of airing irregularly or it was, for whatever reason, whatever the factor. But so the main metric that comes like, well, the ratings weren't great, and that's probably why there wasn't a lot of merchandise or anything like that. But then that doesn't measure the amount of influence it had over the people who did like it. I think there are people, perhaps like yourself, who watched it and were, you might have been a smaller group, but you were more passionate about it. I guess that's what they call like a cult hit or something like that. So anyway, it's just a certain amount of time passes. These are mostly kids, who are watching this stuff. And eventually those kids go out into the world and, start finding their voice and start doing things. And then they start talking about the things that made a big impression on them, whether that thing was deemed a huge financial success at the time or not. I really love, and I talk about that stuff all the time. I really love this thing that maybe not that many people know about, or this movie that maybe not that many people saw. But to me, it's very, very precious and important. And so those people go out and they start YouTube channels, or they have blogs, or they work in the industry and they talk about this thing that influenced them, or they become executives and producers.
Yeah.
And they're like, and then they start, greenlighting things that are similar or related. And it really is it's the kids who grew up with it. They go out into the world and start talking about it. But sometimes that takes decades for that to happen. So there's probably a lot of things that are being done and made now that are sort of maybe dismissed in the mainstream. But if you wait 20 years, that's when you're going to hear what the influence on of those things really was. So I guess that would be my theory on it.
Yeah, just to point something out real quick, I do have this book. Obviously, I showed it last time, right? And to show something, at the back here, you probably can't make it out. It's probably reversed too. There's a name there, XJ0.
Yeah.
And he left that comment on the Roblog back in like 2004. And I still know that guy today. Like he's still like knee deep into all this with me. So yeah, no, man. Like it's really left an impact on people, and I'm glad that's starting to pick up steam now. Whether that means there's going to be a continuation, whether there should be a continuation, two different things, right? But
who knows?
Yeah, who knows? Anyways, next question. What was the most memorable moment during the production of My Life as a Teenage Robot? That was a question from Wabbit.
Oh, Wabbit. There was a bunch. The crew was very, very tight, and we would do things together outside of work. We would do, there was a period where we were all bowling together every week. There was a period where we were all roller skating together every week. That was sort of my wife's doing. I met my wife on the series, by the way. Like she was.
I noticed that actually, like after we did our last session.
Yeah. We would sometimes have like field trips. I remember we all took the train downtown. The LACMA, MoMA. There's the Museum of Modern Art in Los Angeles had an exhibit of classic comic art like Charles Schulz and Winsor McKay and Jack Kirby. And I remember the whole crew took the train downtown and we all had dim sum together, and then we all went to this museum exhibit and all came back. Like that was super fun. The movie Robots, the animated movie, came out, and someone on the crew was like, "We gotta go as a crew. We gotta go see the movie Robots because we weren't going to show about robots." So we did that. So we would do fun things together. Halloween was always really big for us. There's probably images flying out there. Everyone at Nickelodeon they just bring in thousands of children. Everyone would bring their kids to Nickelodeon for Halloween, and every production would build a maze and we would all work really hard to kind of try to top each other. And so we built this giant flying saucer that was very elaborate. We had an indoor corn maze one year. That was a terrible idea because everyone had horrible allergic reactions to it.
Seriously?
But that stuff was very elaborate, and we built like cardboard versions of Jenny and Vexus and a bunch of the characters, and that was really fun. That's more than one memory, but
Oh
that's a
yeah.
bunch.
Yeah. I've seen the picture of you guys in like Halloween costumes. I'm trying to remember what you were dressed as. There's somebody there dressed as Underdog. I don't think that was you.
Oh
Yeah.
no, that's
Somebody
me.
dressed as like Dorothy.
Yeah. Well, that's my wife, Dorothy. I think I was probably the Hamburglar, but it was Leticia was dressed as
Yeah,
Dorothy.
yeah, it was the Hamburglar.
Yeah.
That's what it was. Oh, awesome.
Show you
What?
this. This it's a
What is it?
Valentine card. I made her around that time. That's
Oh,
me as
wow.
Hamburglar, her as Dorothy. So we still have
Wow.
that for wall.
That's awesome. It's awesome you have it framed like that. That's wonderful. Yeah. No, like I was right after we finished up there, I was looking at all the art that you did of everybody who worked on the show, and as I
Mm.
was going through, the last page had your wife on. I was like, "Oh shit, I didn't realize I didn't realize that she was there."
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's
She
great.
I think second season, but
Mhm.
and yeah, did color styling with Chris Hacker.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, so the show really has clearly left an impact on your life, eh?
for sure, again, it'll forever be, you know, forever be part of my life, you know, because I met well, I actually met her before that, but we got
Mhm.
together at the tail end of that show, and in a weird way, and we got married a year or so after that, but we had a 1930s themed wedding where we had everyone dress period at our wedding, and that almost felt like an extension of, you know, because everything about Teenage Robot was so 1930s, you know,
Yeah.
and then we kind of, well, we kept that going through our wedding, and yeah,
Yeah.
it'll always be part of my big part of my life.
Yeah, see
For
that's why I'm so happy to be able to do this interview, right? Because like otherwise I would have had no way of knowing that the community that's going to be interested in the show like years down the line after I'm done doing this,
yeah,
they're not going to have answers to it, right? And I'm really happy that you took the time to do this. We're not over, by the way. That sounded like a conclusion, but yeah, not quite.
well,
Just
actually, I mean, there's a few marriages out of that show. We weren't the
yeah.
only one. You know, uh, Brandon Cruz, Amy Lamprey, and you know, so yeah, we were a very tight crew, and we all kept pretty good touch for a long period after that. I mean, a lot of us are still in touch, but
Mhm.
I think it was just a show everyone had a really good time on.
DC is Lazy asks, how do you deal with art burnout?
Hmm. It's a fair question. I think people people are really important. I think it's easy to convince yourself that like art is everything and what you're trying to accomplish with your art, whether professionally or personally, is so important that you kind of do it. Sometimes it can be done sort of at the expense of personal relationships. And so I think it's important to check in with your friends, make sure, you know, check in with your family members, do things, especially coming out of the pandemic or whatever, you know, depending on your comfortability doing things with people, but at least sort of like, you know, making sure you're talking to people you like. I think that helps a lot. And then more specifically to the art, you know, doing things that keep you inspired. And sometimes you plow in so deep on making stuff you forget to consume.
Mm.
And you know, I work a lot. I work in evenings a lot, and I can't watch TV or movies when I'm working for the most part because it takes me so much focus to draw or to do what I'm doing, that it usually impacts it negatively. And sometimes I'll go, a month or so, and I'll realize like I haven't watched any shows, I haven't watched any movies or read anything in a while. And when I do, my brain, like I'll go to a movie and then my brain will kind of explode again. And it's just this influx of ideas. And you realize like you've just been in the echo chamber so long that it's just like, oh, that's why I'm doing this, because I love watching what other people make. And I'm trying to make stuff that other people will love watching. But it seems like odd advice. Like you gotta watch TV, watch more movies. But I think that really like that reminds you like why you're doing it. But yeah, don't be afraid to take a break if you can. If it's for your job, that's something different. But vacations, my wife is constantly reminding me to take a vacation. I always feel guilty about it, and she's just like, no, the system is set up, that you are allowed to take a certain amount of vacation every year. And I always come back from a vacation feeling refreshed and inspired, especially if I'm traveling, if I'm going to a city or a part of the world I haven't been to before. Again, it's just this influx of ideas. You realize that ideas are the fuel that you use to make things. And so if you're not feeding your brain with experiences or other art, then you're starving yourself, basically.
Yeah, and I think that another thing that I should just mention real quick is that doesn't necessarily need to be animated movies, like especially from what you were saying, like a lot of your influence you pull from old Chaplin movies or Laurel and Hardy, right? So yeah, just getting out and like consuming media gives you ideas.
Movies, horror movie, it's like again, I mentioned Rob and I were big horror movie fans.
Yeah.
And that influence is in Teenage Robot's a pretty innocent show, but it's the more removed your inspiration, it's like if you're making animated movies and you're only watching animated movies, then you're kind of creating another echo chamber. Again, it's reading all sorts of different types of books, and I say that I'm not a huge reader, but watching all sorts of different kinds of movies, and having all sorts of different kinds of life experiences. It's surprising to find out how they're going to inspire or influence the thing that you're making, but they do end up doing that, even if it's kind of indirectly. I love being in a writer's room because everyone's just sort of sharing experiences, things they've done or things they've seen or whatever. And it's kind of this like show and tell. And then you just kind of something like, oh, that gives me an idea that we can use that for a story plot or something for this.
From Sashter, how much has the animation industry changed since the release of My Life as a Teenage Robot?
Gosh, tremendously. I mean, there's that period. I mean, gosh, the pilot of Teenage Robot was still animated on physical cells. Rob actually has painted cells of Jenny from the pilot. But even the series, which we were starting to do, digital production was more part of it. Digital ink and paint was finally part of the production process. We still every background on Teenage Robot was painted by hand. I think we were the last production at the studio to use hand painted backgrounds. So even though the style that Joe Holt came up with, sort of the style of the backgrounds, and Sona Hong and Jenny Baker and others kind of helped influence the color palette. Even though that looks very mechanical, it's still all hand painted. I think I have some here.
Really?
Yeah. Check these out. Look, here's Jenny's bedroom.
No way. No way.
This is an actual painting.
Oh my god.
Yeah. A lot of these we would do very, very small, from the Christmas special.
Wow.
I don't even remember. A lot of these we would just do these little tiny comps because the style was simple and we could do them a lot faster this way. Here's a Mesmers. But yeah, Rob was kind enough to give me the high school.
Oh my
Uh,
god.
to give me a bunch of these. Oh, and I got a couple really cool ones. Here's Coffee by Alex. My name got into a background here. But here
Okay.
I've got this one. This is from
Oh,
Armageddon.
that's
I
yeah.
want to peel off the plastic, but I might damage the painting. But yeah, there's the Armageddon magazine painting. I believe Sana Hong painted this. He did a really beautiful job. We wanted it to look like an old pulp magazine. That
Wow.
was a weird idea. I think the script for that said that it was going to be all like movie reel flashbacks, and I said I've seen that before. What if we did like magazine flashback? We told
Yeah.
the backstory in magazines, and that turned out to be a very complex way to do it, but it was something we hadn't seen before. So
It's one of the most memorable parts of that episode, so it worked out for sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome.
I'm trying to remember what the question again was. We're talking about how the
The industry changed.
industry has changed. So yeah, so cartoons are more digital now. You know, there's everything was still on Teenage Robot was still drawn, even if it was colored digitally. No one was using Cintiqs yet. It was still all drawn on paper and animated on paper. Now it's more common to use, a digital rig, like a Harmony rig. That's sort of like even if it's a 2D style, it's sort of like a digital puppet to manipulate the character, and a lot more shortcuts within, digital in betweening and that sort of thing. And then, of course, just streaming, which I think is something that the industry is still trying to figure out. But like, we were coming off of this model of, you know, Teenage Robot was still done for broadcast on cable. Ratings came from advertising, or the whole rating system is based around selling advertising time, how valuable the space is for TV commercials. Now that is not a thing anymore, I think the industry is still trying to figure out like what is the value. How do you score the value of a show? Is it the number of eyeballs that are watching it? Is it the amount of merchandise it sells? Is it something else? Is it the number of subscriptions it inspires? But that the budgets aren't being paid for by serial manufacturers does change things. It changes who the cartoons are made for. In certain ways, for the better. I think the industry had gotten so dug into cartoons are basically being made for aged 7 to 11-year-old boys, and that's who's buying the stuff that's being advertised on the commercials and all that. I think streaming has helped sort of open up like who you can make shows for, what the format of the show is. We, because of commercials, we would have to time these things down to the second. You couldn't go 2 seconds over time because there wouldn't be enough time to fit it into the block that it was in. So sometimes you cut great story stuff, great jokes. Now you can be a lot more kind of freeform with that. You have to sort of self-edit more, and judge where you're being self-indulgent. But or you can do a mini series, or you can do a long form like this story. This is a 90-minute story, and that's all it needs to be. Or this is a story that can be told over 3 45-minute chapters. But you were so limited. Is this like, yeah, either is an 11 or a 22-minute story? You really don't have any other options.
Yeah.
I mean, those are just a few ways that the industry has changed.
Next question here is from Lucky ASR. What's your favorite character to draw from Teenage Robot?
Probably be Jenny. I'd say if anybody
Hmm.
pops up in a doodle still, it's still Jenny. She was the character I was drawing the most. And so I do love I do have a real love and fondness for Wakeman as well. I
Yeah.
noticed John Fountain mentioned something online how what a difficult to draw character Wakeman was, and she never was for me. I always loved.
Yeah.
Maybe that's because I designed her, but I always liked what you could kind of do with her and the types of expressions you could get out of
Mm.
I always thought were super fun.
Yeah, just a week ago, I think it was, Renzetti was on Twitter, and I said I was never able to draw this character. Like, it's
Yeah.
wicked. Oh my god. Aaron Foster asked, and he's the person who did the intro on our YouTube channel. If like you saw the Fountain interview, like that was there. Uh, what were the biggest highs and lows of working on Teenage Robot?
I mean, probably stuff we've already discussed. I mean, certainly
Mm,
I think the low would be being canceled, and
yeah.
the sort of the insult of like the last year of our work wasn't broadcast. I think that was, I it really stung at the time. I think it's helped toughen my skin for other hard things that have happened in my career since then. You can't take anything for granted, even when you've made it. Doesn't guarantee anything. That you've put hard work into something doesn't guarantee that it's going to get out in the world for people to see it. And then, yeah, I think the highs were, I think going to the Emmys. Yeah, as you mentioned, Bryan won an Emmy. I think Sana Hong got an Emmy, though I don't think I went the year
Mm,
she got one. And then I think Escape from Cluster Prime was nominated, did
yeah.
not win, but that was a super fun night.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, uh, I remember partying with the whole crew that night, and it was a lot of fun. It felt really really special. I think we rented a limo. We all met at Rob's house and rented a limo and went together, and that was super fun.
I really want to ask this one because I thought that the comment was awesome, and I already sent it to you. Uh, this is a question from Noah Basseri. I have no idea what it means whatsoever. I'm not an artist myself. Okay, and what he says is, I'm writing my undergraduate thesis on Mr. Kirwan's masterful art direction on Wander Over Yonder. My question is, when art directing on Teenage Robot and Wander, was there a conscious effort to apply graphic design theories like Gestalt and semiotics to the look of the show like they did back in UPA?
Um, so I mean, yes and no. I think those particular theory, I don't know that much about those.
Okay.
There wasn't discussion of those two particular theories, but um, I think kind of any show you work on, you need theories of some sort, and you need ways to talk about what the show is going to what it's going to feel like and how it's going to work, and it's kind of hard to know what that is before you do it. But
Mm-hmm.
I remember, so both of those shows I was so excited to work on them that I remember taking a little notebook and just writing a little description down of what I thought that these shows were going to look and feel like when they were done. And the Teenage Robot one, I was probably closer on. The Wander one, I was way off because that had its own kind of unique journey of what the look and feel ended up being. But I think that's part of the fun of it. You try to get a picture in your head, and so Teenage Robot, I just had this idea of like it was like finding a show that had been made 50 years ago that you had never heard of. Like you
Mm-hmm.
opened up a trunk and there was this whole series that had been made, almost like it was made in like a parallel universe, and you somehow had never heard of it, but like there it was. And I think there are some elements of that kind of like nostalgia and like trying to make it kind of feel like it's a quote unquote classic cartoon, but
Yeah.
even like having the sort of the charm, more so than it being sort of like a false artifact or something like that. But I think Teenage Robot was so much like an art, wanting it to be like an Art Deco movie, like a advertising poster to come to life. Wander, I really wanted to do something that we hadn't seen before,
Mm-hmm.
and I think like Wander changed a lot because when I first started working on the pilot, I thought I was making a western, and we realized like that was like in terms of palette and shape language and all that. I realized pretty quickly that that's not what the show was at all, and Craig kind of kept drifting into different directions, and I realized it wasn't a Western, it was a show about like a hippie character and this sort of psychedelic language of like the 60s and 70s kept coming into it. And so we had these really, really graphic layouts that had this very sort of gloopy shape language that felt like it could be like a rock poster from the 70s or something out of Yellow Submarine. But then I was like, we're not gonna execute it that way. We're gonna put more twists on top of it. And I was like, it's gonna be super graphic, but then there's gonna be Wander is all about exploring the universe and the thrill of discovery. So there has to these worlds have to feel real and they have to feel tactile. So it's going to be super graphic, but it's going to have a sense of depth and it's going to have a sense of light and it's going to have a sense of texture. Because I realized on Teenage Robot, I think we had a lot of fun with the graphicness of it, but then sometimes the sort of that the whole picture plane was sort of collapsed. Sometimes that would fight against certain types of stories you would want to tell, or sometimes the kind of the conceit of like, I think we there were some times where you would sort of step on the storytelling because Jenny would be using a phone, but it would be a 1930s phone, and it would be a 1930s phone that was drawn in a sci-fi Art Deco flat style. And you'd spend so much time sort of looking at like, what is that she's talking into before you put together that it was a phone, that it almost kind of would step on the joke or whatever it was. So, and I have no regrets about designing things the way we did on that show, but I realized like there are times where the conceits of what your visual style are are so strong that they actually kind of you start tripping over them a little bit, and you find ways to broaden it. And I think we did in Teenage Robot, and then Wander was very much about the style is kind of this, but then if we go to this planet, the style can kind of become something totally different depending on what type of story we want to tell.
Okay.
So that's a really long-winded answer. I don't know if that answers that person's question at all, but I
Yeah.
guess just there are theories, like you theories you talk about with your team of what it is that you're trying to do, and usually those theories change dramatically. But you have to be some. There has to be something you're trying to do, So there are always theories.
Yeah. Yeah, well, anyways, I think that his undergraduate thesis is already written because he asked that question like 2 or 3 months ago at this point. Yeah, so we addressed it. I just really wanted to mention that because I think that's awesome that people are like writing undergraduate theses about you.
Yeah, that's very humbling,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
good luck to the person on that.
Yeah, this one is self-indulgent, absolutely, but somebody else asked it, so I'm going to take the opportunity. Astro asks, what are your thoughts about Teenage Robot still having an active community after all this time, and do you have any thoughts on the YouTube channel that we're doing this for? You can just say whether or not you're surprised that it exists. Like that's fine.
Yeah, it was surprising when I learned about it because I think I tracked the fan community pretty closely when I was working on the show, and maybe the first couple of years after, and then I sort of because again we had that little production blog and I was contributing to it quite a bit, and I had a fun time doing that. But then I kind of hadn't checked in after that, and so then to sort of learn that there was still this kind of active community was kind of fun and exciting, and to see you guys kind of discussing this stuff was fun because again a lot of it I haven't thought about it in 20 years, so it was kind of like, oh yeah, I remember that was an episode that we did that or whatever. There's a sense of discovery to it and sort of seeing what it inspires people to think of or what people's impressions of it are, or even what their memories of it are, if they saw it as young kids and maybe their impression at that age is different than what it is as an adult. But yeah, it's a hoot, shall we say.
Okay. Awesome. Glad to hear it, man. The last question that I'm going to ask is an obvious one. Asked by Teal again. Teal, you get two. You're the only person. Congratulations. Uh, what are you working on right now? Like, what can you tell us that you're working on right now?
Oh, what can I tell you? I uh I'm working, so I'm still working at Warner Brothers. I'm still involved with Looney Tunes. I am working on a Porky and Daffy movie, which has been announced to
Hmm.
the press. A science fiction Porky and Daffy feature length 2D movie. That's super fun. I hope to have a longer relationship with Looney Tunes, but there's other things that other types of projects I want to do. Like I said, there's tones and things that I think would surprise, even whatever fans I have. I think there are things I want to do that might even surprise them, that might not look or feel anything like stuff I've done before.
Hmm.
Uh, and that's basically what I'm doing professionally. I have little projects. I like to make things. I like to make little sculptures and things in my free time here in my studio. I have like little wooden projects I'm working on. I do a lot of paper mache work. I do I freelance for a guy who lets me draw like licensed Betty Boop merchandise.
Oh, okay.
Like I said, I'm a big Fleischer fan, so somebody someone paying me to draw any classic cartoon character is super fun for me. I feel super honored that I've gotten to professionally draw Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse, you know uh, Betty Boop, Coco the Clown. It's all that's been sort of a dream come true.
Before we wrap up here, this is something I don't know if you're aware of. The Teenage Robot Fanbase YouTube channel isn't the only YouTube channel that's been making videos about a teenage robot. There's another thing going on. It's been going on longer than I've been doing this, and I've been doing this for 7 years. It's a project called My Life as a Teenage Robot Rebooted. Have you heard about this at all?
I don't know. Perhaps,
Yeah.
perhaps not. I don't know.
Okay. All right. So what I'm going to do, they were kind enough to give me a little bit of material to show you. I don't really know what I want you to say about this, if anything at all. I just want you to
Oh,
know
cool.
that it exists. There's more. It's Discord's just having trouble sending it. Okay, that one's too big. I'm gonna send you like a link to the folder with all this too.
Oh, okay, cool.
All right. There's gonna be more. See if it lets me send all these at the same time. Yeah, and I'll tell you a little bit more about this once I've actually got this sent. Okay, that's another thing. And something that they've done, they have actually completed a 22-minute long animatic of a full episode.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah,
neat. I was gonna say, like, what is their goal with this? So they're actually
that's
making their episodes.
they have a very lofty goal. Once again, they've been out longer than I have. Their goal is to make 2 seasons worth of material, which is a lot, obviously.
Yeah.
It's all like a fan project and everything. I'm not sure if at this point it's just going to be animatics or if they're planning on animating some of it. But there is some animation in the material that I sent you. Um,
Okay.
yeah, I just wanted to bring that to your attention that that does exist. Renzetti already knows about it. He's known about it for years. But yeah, I just wanted to show some of that off. So if you have any general thoughts about it, just let me know.
No, it looks super cool. I mean, again, it's fun to see. Again, like I was saying, like people who are influenced or inspired by it, and if that inspires them to do things with it, I don't own the characters, and I can't, I don't,
Oh yeah, like
you know.
that's
But it's actually, I mean, the internet. It's that's the kind of the cool thing about the internet is that people can kind of go and do their own thing with this stuff
yeah.
and share it with other fans. And so yeah, I'm only happy to see that it spawns a life of its own. And again, I work on my day job is working on Looney Tunes, like I've worked on a bunch of reboots now, breathing new life into things that were made years and years ago. Looney Tunes. Everyone who originally worked on it is long since deceased, and you keep sort of wondering. I don't know what they would think of what we're doing with it, but we're trying to honor them in
Mm.
our way, and keep it true to the spirit of the original stuff. So to me, it's exciting to see other people doing things with these characters, and working in the style, and
Yeah.
if it inspires them in some way, then that's great.
No, I'm happy to hear that, man. And I know they're going to appreciate that too. I just want to extend the invitation to them, like, oh yeah, and I'm already going to be talking to them. Might as well show that off too. Yeah, yeah. The two links that I sent you, you can look into it a little bit deeper if you're interested. You don't need to tell me whether or not you're going to do that.
I
That's
see they found the same font, so that's
yes.
it's
Yeah.
it's halfway there, right there.
Yeah, right. There we go. Yeah, but now that's out of the way, I have no more questions for you. I just wanted to say, like, honest to God, like, hand to my heart right now, like, this when I created that channel, the channel that we're doing this for, I was 15 years old, right? And after all this time, like, one of the things I said that I want to do, I do. Like, there are two people for sure that I want to talk to about Teenage Robot, and that would be yourself and Mr. Renzetti. So you've, as cheesy as it sounds,
Scratch
you've
one
kind
off
of. Hmm?
the list. You can scratch one off the list there.
Yeah, yeah, and I really appreciate you doing that for me, and I appreciate you doing it for like the general community and people in the future who are going to be curious about your work, because I really want an interview like this to be out there, and it very well could be long. It will be long. There's
Pretty heavily edited.
it's going to be heavily edited. I'm not
Like I
gonna
said, it's gold.
yeah, I'm not going to cut out too much of what you're saying. I'm going to be cutting out dead air is what I'm going to be doing. Yeah, that way it's more consumable for people. But
Oh, okay.
I seriously appreciate you doing this for me and for the YouTube channel. Yeah,
Well, it's been my pleasure, and
yeah,
thanks for supporting the show, and yeah, it's been a lot of fun to do this interview.
yeah. Thank you, man. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, leave a rating. If you want to reach us, leave a comment. Or check out our other platforms. Links are in the description.